Alexa, turn on studio. Welcome all and all. Welcome in. It is the Top 25 Double Take Show. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Hope you are enjoying your Monday. I know it's the Olympics. I know there's other things that are going on, but we appreciate you taking the time to join us nonetheless. This is the Top 25 Show for the Hoopsville members. And yes, I badly need a haircut. Thanks to all of you who are supporting us. I'll go get that haircut sometime in the next week. So here's the deal, folks. We are near the end of our Top 25 Double Takes for the season. Next week may be our final one. We might squeeze one in maybe on March 3rd. I'm still up for debate on that one, but definitely tune in on the 23rd. If you're watching this on the archive and you want to watch that one on the 23rd live, well, you got to become a Hoopsville member. Sign up at buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. That's buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville, where we talk all top 25 and you get early access to this show for a bit of time. Our Dubious, our Debatable, and our Deep Dive teams. Later in the game, we'll talk women's basketball. I'll be doing that with Riley Zayas. I'll play his foil. Coming up, we got men's with Ryan Scott, and we haven't heard from him in a long time, and certainly not in the top 25. You probably didn't know he was a voter. Howard Herman will be joining us out of the Northeast. Talk men. Quickly, men's top 25 is out. As we are airing this, I'll give you some of the women's information as well, which hasn't officially been published, but it is done. Really no changes in the top six. Mount Union moved up a couple of spots despite a win over Wilmington in overtime. Mary Washington moved up. Claremont Mudd Scripps moved up. Tufts moved up. Christopher Newport fell a couple spots after losing to Mary Washington. Gustavus Adolphus fell from 7th to 12th with their loss to Carrollton. And a lot of shuffling the rest of the way. Otterbein moved up 3 spots, for example. Wesleyan moved up 2 spots. Maryville jumped up 3 to 20. La Crosse fell 2 by losing by 12 to Stevens Point. Carthage, Whitworth, WPI, and Oshkosh all moved into the top 25, while Roanoke, NYU, Franklin, and Marshall Rhodes fell out. Interesting developments there. 46 teams being voted on so far on the men's poll. We'll recap the women's in a little bit, but just to note for you off the top of the show, the top 25 looks very similar. A lot of teams still getting votes, not as many as I thought, but there's some interesting movement in there, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the other side. So let's talk the men's top 25, shall we? What have we seen? What will we see? How will this all break down? And we're welcoming in, as we said, a new friend as an old friend. Howard Herman joins us on the Top 25 Double Take Show on the Hoopsville Hotline. Howard, first and foremost, it's been a long time. You're still with the Berkshire Eagle, right? They still have a newspaper out in that neck of the woods?
We still have a newspaper. We're actually still making money. We were about 5 years ago members of a giant chain that was one of those really bad giant chains, and they sold us to a group of localish investors, and we've been happy ever since. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure how many actual D3 basketball writers there are at newspapers anymore.
No, that's a good point, Howard. Ryan's chuckling. I agree. I don't think there's a lot. Other than on their own campuses. Of course, just down here, interesting news. Baltimore Banner looks like it's going to take over a lot of the Washington Post sports writing, and some in the Washington area have taken on the All-Met honors. It's an interesting time in the writing world. But Howard, we're glad to have you on here. Top 25 is out, as I mentioned. It's interesting. St. Thomas and Trinity seem to be trading places a little bit. Ryan, Emory held firm. The number one votes are holding firm. Mount Union moved up. I actually moved them down after their win over Wilmington. Your thoughts on it, Ryan?
I mean, I think with St. Thomas, it's a couple of factors. One, they've had like 4 or 3 out of the last 4 of their conference games have been relatively close, which I'm sure people don't like over time. Also, their big close loss to WashU is looking worse and worse every week as it goes along. So if you're going back and looking at the whole body of work, I think in comparison, especially to some of these teams from the power conferences where they're just playing more and more top level games, the comparison is a little more difficult. But yeah, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. When I tweeted out my ballot this weekend, I just said, like, we're all going to get proven wrong, because it's going to be one of those tournaments where you see upsets all over the place, and it's going to be real hard to predict. If anyone wins the bracket contest with more than half, then they really deserve it.
Go play the lottery, to be honest. No, I agree with you. I think it's an absolute going to be feast and famine all at the same time. Howard, your thoughts? You're up in New England there. NESCAC has not had a ton of love in the top 25, though we'll talk a little bit about here. But in general, NESCAC seems, the Northeast seems well represented. You've got Tufts, you've got some others. Trinity's certainly still in the conversation.
Well, Trinity, in my opinion, is the best team I have seen all year. And I've seen a lot of teams. They do just about everything well. And Endicott, I have a soft spot for Endicott because my youngest child graduated from there. And WPI have become, standard bearers in their respective leagues. There's one point about NESCAC, and I know I've seen it online elsewhere, where there are some of us, present company not included, who complain sometimes about that they don't play home and home, which I understand, which makes every game they play more important because they can't make up for it. And Dave, you might know this, but I don't think there is another league in Division III that plays Friday night, Saturday afternoon, which has got to be the hardest turnaround in college basketball.
I think the Landmark played with that idea for a short period of time for Merchant Marine, finally threw enough of a hissy fit, and so did some others at Scranton and elsewhere.
SUNYAC does.
SUNYAC does a little. That's right. SUNYAC does a little bit. Yeah. It's not
perfect.
Bit, sometimes it's changes, but yeah, they're about the close second.
Yeah, and it's a distance that, I just think, and only one team in NESCAC plays Friday, Sunday, and that's the school that doesn't have a travel partner.
Right. Their travel, right, which is, Bates this year?
Yeah.
I think it was Bates, because Wesleyan played both mains this week, and Trinity played Bates this week. I think that was the oddity.
I used to joke with people, and I said, I liked it when Williams played Friday, Sunday, because Sunday, when we published a newspaper on Monday, it was the only local story. So it got plenty of publicity.
That's a very good point. Well, Howard, it's great to have you. Let's get into this. We do our Dubious, we do our deep dive, and we do our Debatable. For a reminder to anybody who may be new to this, and I never assume there isn't anybody new, our Dubious selections are teams that we think, hey, maybe they should be top 25, but maybe they're flying a little too high, or at least too high in our opinion. And so we go with that. That's what dubious means. Doesn't mean they're not top 25 worthy, maybe just too high. And Ryan, since he is the expert in this show, he gets to go first and let the guest understand how it all works. Ryan, who's your dubious this week?
Yeah, I always feel bad picking one of these out, but
yeah, I know.
I'm going to go with Otterbein this week. I know we had some debate about them a couple of weeks ago. They're really sliding pretty far up in this poll now, up to 17. And there's just not a resume really there in terms of wins, right? They haven't lost much. They're winning the games that they're playing. But lost to Denison, lost to Mount Union twice. And there isn't really a signature win on here. The OAC is not at the level that it has been in recent years. And so being the number 2 team in that conference is not necessarily a top 25 resume. And I know when we've seen them, they played, the Denison game was close, and Mount Union's been pretty competitive both times. So certainly they're a team that is in the mix, I guess. But just feels like, especially compared to some of the resumes we're seeing now, as I mentioned, we're getting into the depth of conference play, and some of these teams are really putting up a strong resume with wins that Otterbein just doesn't have.
Interesting take. Howard, do you want to take a bite at that apple with the Cardinals?
Yeah, the one thing I noticed I was doing when I saw you guys were going to talk about them, I did a little research because I hadn't seen them play because they don't get up this part. The one thing that they have, I think, that's in their favor is they are the top defensive team in that league. And defense is what really travels, especially when you get into mid to late February.
No, you've got a great point. And it's interesting. I'm kind of in the middle. I've got Otterbein a little bit higher than where they sit in the poll. They currently sit, where did I lose them? 17. I've got them a little bit higher, but I've had them kind of held there, like I've done with Endicott and some others. I've kind of ceilinged them a little bit. They haven't moved very much in the last few weeks, win or loss. I do stock on the fact that they lost to Mount Union as 2 games they lost way back at the end of November, beginning of December. Yes, they do have the third loss in totality and to Mount Union, but it was by 5 at home. So I've kind of chalked this up to, I think they're pretty good. I think Andy Winters' squad has proven themselves, but admittedly, when you look at some of the other resumes, you start to wonder, okay, is this conference all that challenging? Mount Union, I dinged them a little bit for not beating Wilmington handily, right? So it's kind of the same conversation. I think it's a worthy, and at this point, as Ryan knows fully well, and we'll tell it to everybody else, we're also scratching deep to find some dubious choices that we have not talked about this season, or at least in this role. So sometimes you got to go deep. And Otterbein, I don't think is a horrible pick necessarily, but it's certainly, I agree with Howard. I think their defense is what really kind of carries a lot of their weight.
You know, Dave,
Howard.
The other thing is you can't, when it comes to conference play, you can only play who's in your league. And I know you punish some teams for playing in it who haven't played a strong league schedule, but it's not like Otterbein can jump on a bus and drive up and play Hamilton, as a league game. For example,
they can't?
You can only play who you can play.
I was under the impression you could play whoever the heck you wanted to play. I'm just kidding. We should point out, before they got into conference play, they had a win over Wittenberg. That looks pretty good at 16-7. Mount St. Joe's have resurged to be 13-11 this year. Same for La Roche, 13-11 for Brockport. There's a pattern here. 15-9 Geneseo and 15-8 Denison. Those are their out-of-conference games before they started playing some conference opponents. You also have Ohio Wesleyan, Allegheny, and Westminster. Their schedule hasn't been bad, but to your point, Ryan, they haven't played anybody outside the conference that is a world beater.
And they have won the big games that they played.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Howard, who's your dubious pick, sir?
I don't have I couldn't really pick one because by this time everybody's kind of fallen into where they are. But when you look at the top 25, which I've got in front of me, somehow, those Wisconsin teams keep falling out, coming back in, and I'm not so sure about how Oshkosh is. Whether they should be, whether we should think of them as a legitimate, threat.
I like the pick. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
So Oshkosh is one of those, they play in a different style this year. They're doing a lot more fast-paced movement, and I do wonder the second time through the conference if that kind of got found out a little bit. You see they had the 3 losses in a row starting the second move through. And with a league like that, the coaching is going to be good. The scouting is going to be really good. And if, it may be one of those things that they're talented and they can sneak into a tournament and then find some more teams that haven't played them yet. Right. But they got to get through this WIAC playing a lot of teams for a third time that are going to know how they're going. And so I have Oshkosh in my poll down near the bottom because I do think the talent's there. And when you got a team like that, that's really deep and you don't have to rely on just one person. Especially, when you get into WIAC play, it's really helpful to have a lot of weapons, and they certainly do.
I like Oshkosh. I like a lot of teams, but I have this problem with the conference right now. At some point, somebody's got to stand out. And when you got 3 teams tied at 8-4, 2 teams at 7-5, Oshkosh is one of those at 8-4 with Stevens Point, Whitewater. I struggle a little bit. Now, I've got one of those teams in my top 25, and it's not the one we're talking about. They've kind of yo-yoed, right? They lost to Stevens Point after beating Whitewater and La Crosse. Then they won 3 straight. Then they lost 3 straight. Now they've won 3 straight, and they got 2 more coming back at them, La Crosse and Stevens Point. I'll be more interested in the next 2 weeks who survives this, and then I think I'll know who is a really good top 25 team. Otherwise, I think that we've got a lot of really good teams, but maybe no standouts this year.
And I think that they've got, what is probably the 2 best teams in the conference as their last 2 games. So we will know a whole lot about them this week.
That's a fair point. Yeah, no, that's actually a really fair point. All right, so that's Dubious down, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We now move on to Deep Dive. In other words, team we think's not getting enough attention. The opposite of Dubious. Usually a team is not getting any votes or barely getting any votes. outside the top 25 and maybe a team that deserves some, even if we're not voting for them ourselves. Howard, we'll start with you. Who is your deep dive choice?
The team I was thinking about was Oswego. It's a team that's won, 4 SUNYAC titles going back to 22-23 through to 16-17. And they're 2 games behind league leader Cortland, but they're both 19-4 right now. Oswego has the second best scorer in the league in Deacon Judd, who's averaging 18 points a game. I've seen them play in years past. Jason Leone does a great job coaching. I don't know how they get kids up there.
It's
because because it's one of those plays. I went up there a couple of years ago when Williams played up there and won that pot up there and got to the Sweet 16. And it sometimes felt like you drive to the end of the earth and turn left, and there you are. But I feel like, and I know Cortland's leading the league right now, but when push comes to shove, resume is important, but legacy is also important at this time of year. And Oswego has known how to win those big games in the past and could very well, while they're not a top 25 team, if they have to win the league to get in, but that's just a distinct possibility for them.
I got some thoughts. It's interesting. We should point out they're coming off of a loss to Cortland, but I still think it's an interesting conversation because they've been sneaky off the radar, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a team we didn't know a ton about coming in. They have Judd coming back, who's an all-region player, but they graduated a decent amount. And so I think most people felt like a regression. And then, they didn't play a super, super tough schedule this year. They had the loss to Union, who I think is, a borderline top 25 team. And obviously the 2 to Cortland have been close. And that's a team I'm voting for and I think is pretty good. And so you say, well, is Oswego one of those teams that should also be in consideration? But they're not really giving us anything to go on. And you watch them and they look a lot like an Oswego team, that you're used to seeing. But without that sort of out of region, out of conference look to really kind of as a metric to judge them by, it's really hard to know. And so I sat and looked at this resume a bunch while I was doing my ballot this week going, is this one of those teams you need to bump in there? And I'm not sure. And I'm just letting the fact that they went 0-2 against Cortland make that decision for me, right? If this is a team that I think should be up there, they probably figure out a way to win one of those.
Yeah.
And I watched the first meetup, which was to double overtime or whatever.
Double overtime. Yeah. 5 point.
And they just were not the better team. And so I've kind of let that stand. Maybe that's not fair to Jason and his guys, but they're going to have to win this conference tournament anyway if they want to move on. So let them go prove it on the court.
Yeah, I find it interesting. They played a bunch of overtime games. I mistakenly said earlier when we were discussing this that they had lost 3 of their 4 losses were in overtime. In fact, they're 2-2 in overtime games. They did lose to Cortland this last time out. So some of these have been a little bit hairy, right? Like a little too close to call. They lost to Union at the start of the season by 6. I don't find that as a bad loss. I kind of wish they'd gotten one of those Cortland ones back, especially the home game on Saturday. But there's just something sneaky. Maybe it's the conference in general. We're getting used to not having Brockport, right? Not having Geneseo in this conference. And so now Oneonta is tied with them for second. A game in which Oneonta beat them in overtime back on the 20th of January. That's right. They played them twice in a week, and they beat them in the first going. I like this pick only because it makes me think, right? And that's all that really matters for the deep dive is make us think, even if we're not voting for them. There's a lot of 4-loss teams that are in or less that are interesting to talk about. I like it. Ryan, who's yours?
Well, and I'll just say before we move on that SUNYAC, I think is getting better. I think there are more competitive teams in that conference too. So the closer results are not, that far off, right? New Paltz has been good. I think Plattsburgh's getting better. There's a number of them that are improving. The team that I want to go for is another one of these teams that's in the same situation like Oswego that I kind of spend a lot of time looking at the resume. I've seen them play a couple of times, not ready quite to pull the trigger, largely because of the schedule. A lot of the same things we've been talking about with Oswego and Otterbein. I'm going with Concordia, Texas. They've got a high-powered offense. They play at a super fast pace. Joey Ramirez is the leading scorer there. He's at 23 points a game, but I think he had a 50-pointer or pretty close to it at some point this year. And they're, like I said, I watched them play, and they're a pretty dangerous team. It's not one of these that's just, throwing a bunch of points up there for the heck of it. They've only lost, 2 games in 2026. And that was the 2 to St. Thomas, which have been relatively competitive. And so, especially this weekend when they had to go to Colorado College and play fast at altitude and then fly back and play St. Thomas, I was pretty impressed with how they did. Again, I'm not ready to pull the trigger. I'm not ready to put them in the top 25, but I think they're perfectly capable of pulling an upset in a conference tournament. And then definitely a team you don't want to see in the first round who's going to come in and score 100 points no matter what you do to them.
I agree with you. By the way, note, I do not have their logo. I am stunned. I swore I had their logo. For those wondering, Dave, put up his logo. I don't have it. I got to call them. I got to figure out why I don't have a tornado logo. Howard, thoughts on Concordia? No, they're one that were pretty far off. Well, they haven't been off my radar. I've been thinking about them, but your thoughts on them?
I think, in a lot of leagues, I'm not sure how tough their league is, but when you're playing off the radar, those are the teams that you find the most interesting as you get into February.
Yeah, but the one thing I think the one problem I have with Concordia is I'm waiting. Listen, I was talking to somebody about one of their players the other day, and they're like, "Oh, you don't have them in whatever we were talking about." I said, "Well, I think they're good, but until they can show something against St. Thomas, it's just another team in the conference for me." And I think that's where they keep falling when I go to vote. I don't know, Ryan, if I'm saying that maybe in a logical way, but I feel like you got to go and beat St. Thomas once, right?
Well, then one of these teams that does play fast and scores a ton of points, you really want them to play against a defense that's going to challenge them. And they don't get a lot of that in conference. And so, I mean, the St. Thomas games have told us a little bit, but it's not enough to really build a national rep because, we've been burned plenty of times over the years by these teams that have high powered offenses. And when they run up against somebody who can actually go toe to toe with them, just crumble. And so it's, I think people are a little gun shy when it comes to pulling a trigger on a team like this, and their schedule just hasn't really been conducive to helping us.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with what's going on in Austin. 19-4 again, another 4-loss team, 12-2, but they're coming off that loss by 8 to St. Thomas. They lost to St. Thomas earlier by 2. They lost also to Mary Hardin Baylor and Howard Payne earlier in the season in some high scoring games, as Ryan pointed out. All right,
you mentioned that, but in those 2 losses to St. Thomas, they didn't break 80, and I think that's
true.
That tells you something about a good defense can really slow down that high powered offense.
Very good point. That's kind of nailed the button there. All right, deep dive done and dusted. We'll move on to Debatable, a team that this is a catch-all team that maybe's in the top 25 at any position. And we just want to debate them. Maybe you've got them lower, you've got them higher, you're uncomfortable, whatever the case may be. I could pick out a handful of teams that would be debatable on my top 25 ballot. Ryan, we'll start with you. Who do you got?
So this is the one that I'm just kind of head scratching on. And maybe I've seen them more than either of you two guys, so you can't help me out. But I want to bring up Trine, our, was it 2 years ago, national champions?
Yep.
They are in a really unique situation. Obviously, John Vanderwall comes in, off a really long, successful time at Marietta. We saw them when I was out at the Great Lakes Invitational, and he talked about just how difficult it has been bringing the team together, right? Because he brought a couple of seniors with him from Marietta to help set some culture for him there. He also brought some recruits that he was recruiting to Marietta that are now coming to Trine. And then there was the remaining players plus the new recruits that were coming in there who hadn't even gotten the Trine experience yet. And he said, it feels like I'm trying to mesh 4 teams together. And that's what the results have looked like, right? They've looked fantastic in some games and they looked pretty discombobulated in others. The 3 losses in conference there are all road losses to the other best teams in the conference, which is exactly what you expect from a team that doesn't quite know what it's doing yet, right? It's a talented team that hasn't put it all together. And just gets to a point though that like if they do manage here in the next couple of weeks to really knuckle down and get this thing done, looks like there's a good chance they'll have the tournament at home. I think this is a talent-wise a top 25 team with a really experienced coach on the sideline, and somebody's going to get them, some host is going to get them in the first round, and that could be really dangerous.
Yeah, this is an interesting squad. I think the entire MIA by the way just feels a bit backward. But Ryan, quickly about your coaching, I find it interesting because I think you went to a very different type of coach too. Like I there weren't any direct correlations, other than they're both very good coaches. But I don't see them as the same style, and so you really have to adjust, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly they're not playing the same way for sure. I do think personality-wise, they're probably a little intense guys. I mean,
yeah, that's
at
true.
least on the court. Like you're going to get coached the same way, maybe to do different things, but I think you're going to get the same style in practice.
Howard, any thoughts on Debatable there?
Well, I was thinking about, and they made it back into the top 25 this week, was WPI, who, when you look at the NUMAC, is a good league in the Northeast, but they, I guess their signature game would have been Tufts, and they lost that game. And while they still have, a couple more to go, they've only 3 teams in the NUMAC who are above, 4 teams in the NUMAC who are above 500 in conference play. So are they good enough? Has the NUMAC not played as well this year? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, Ryan, I'll let you take a stab at WPI as a pick here for Debatable.
No, I think this is a perfect one because that's the same questions we all have, right? You know what Bartley has done there, and they are going to be good defensively. They're not going to make a lot of mistakes. They're going to play super hard. Clearly, they're winning games, but are they at that national level this year? And it doesn't feel like they're quite at the same level they have been. They beat St. Joe's from Maine back before all the injuries happened. And then, they've done pretty well running through this conference, right? They beat Babson twice. They've only dropped the 2, and I think it's going to be a team nobody wants to see in the tournament. I suspect they'll be able to make it through, but just not on the level. I don't have them in the top 25. I haven't even really considered them because I just don't think they're quite at the same level we're used to seeing them, even if they're a very similar team.
Yeah, listen, WPI, I have been known to love too much. Maybe I've been a little too harsher because I've felt burned by this team on too many occasions. I've had them yo-yo out of my top 25. It was funny because at one point I'm like, oh, maybe I'll consider Babson for the ballot this week. And then I went, well, if I'm considering Babson, I got to be considering WPI. So, right. And I don't feel comfortable popping WPI back in there right now because I just feel like they just don't have the it, maybe it is. The conference is a little bit down, though competitive. It's still very competitive. Salve Regina has certainly made that a little bit more interesting this season. I
think it's a little deeper.
Yeah, agreed. I think it is deeper while losing the top a little bit, maybe. It's a good choice, Howard. The Engineers, the only thing I need them to do now, I think, honestly, is get somewhere in March that is noticeable for all of us. I think we're all waiting for that evolution of the team, and we just haven't seen it. Nobody but Babson from the NUMAC's done anything deep in or significant in an NCAA tournament, right? Oh, sorry, Springfield.
In a while.
Springfield. Yeah, Springfield. I forgot about them. But again, it was back in the Babson era. So, good choice. Tough team to just try and go out there and pull a string on. Good choices, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts on the top 25, Howard, this season, especially from the Northeast angle, which we don't always get?
Well, as always, I appreciate the invitation. But what I think, as I looked at the top 25, you've got 3 NESCAC teams right up near the top. Trinity was my number 1 this week because I still think they haven't really done much to discourage it. And I think when they play the other top teams, they're playing a tough schedule. But the team that I don't think in NESCAC teams that out in NESCAC people really don't want to have to play will be Tufts because they have Division I size. which not everybody at the Division III level has. And that's a real makes them a really tough out, even if they aren't quite as offensively gifted or quite as defensively strong as Trinity has been.
I'm seeing more of that come into Division III, but you raise a good point, Howard. I think that's what's interesting. And Trinity's got this kind of alter ego defense that even last year stunned a lot of us. Ryan, your thoughts on that or anything else?
Well, I mean, that is the same thing, right? I think Tufts has been, if nothing else over the last few years, very inconsistent, right? Especially against the best teams. But at the same time, when you're trying to rank them in a top 25 and you see, Giamessi and Bernstein, who's 6'11", and a big dude in the middle, you're like, well, how is Mary Washington ever going to get rebounds against, or St. Thomas, who isn't particularly big? You just, it's hard to overlook that size that they can bring in. And when they're up against an SCAC team that can maybe compare a little bit in the size, that's one thing. But some of these teams that are trying to be fast, and because Tufts has great guard play too. And so it really is the balance of do I want a team that's always consistent every single day, or do I want a team that can just run you over on a good night? And that's a hard one to balance.
What I think is interesting when you mentioned that, Ryan, the problem becomes with some of these teams is you don't see them. When you get to the NCAA tournament, somebody is going to play at Tufts or a Trinity, and they will have never seen a team that plays like that. And that becomes a difficult challenge for the coaching staff. I can think back to the height of the Mike Maker era at Williams, when Amherst would beat them 3 times, except in the NCAA tournament. Yep. And what always tended to happen was the schools in your league know each other so well. By the time, you play them 3-4 years, you know what James Cosgrove is running at Trinity. You know what Chris Bartley's running at WPI. So the teams in NUMAC know all that. But you drop WPI into a pod with 3 schools that they've never seen, and then you run in, and that could be a problem for those other teams. I mentioned when I was at the Oswego sectional a couple of years ago, none of the teams up there had ever had seen Oswego, had no idea what Williams did. So it's a challenge. It's a bigger challenge in the tournament than it is during league play.
Yep, good point for sure. I don't know what to make of Tufts this year, and to be honest, I don't know what to make of the NESCAC. Tufts made that nice run and then kind of sputtered, and I'm wondering if the conference knows them. But they've stayed a little bit more status quo. But that's what the NESCAC tournament's all about. Speaking of which, we'll hear from Howard coming up on Thursday's show. He'll give us a little recap of what to expect in that NESCAC tournament on Thursday's edition. Brandon Linton squad has won their last 2, but are 3-2 in their last 5. Got Colby coming up this weekend. Gentlemen, appreciate your time as always. Enjoy the rest of the basketball that shall be played. And, enjoy the best time of the year, right?
Absolutely. Spend my week watching high school kids play now.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. You enjoy that, sir, in Western Mass. Take care, guys. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Howard Herman, Ryan Scott joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline to talk men's basketball. Again, if you missed it, Carthage, Whitworth, WPI, Oshkosh are into the poll, while Roanoke, NYU, F&M, and Rhodes fell out. Speaking of Rhodes, working on the news, so it's not broken, but it's out there. Rhodes women's basketball coach let go seemingly out of nowhere last week after we got done talking to their men's coach. With that in mind, we'll pivot to the women's side to talk women's basketball. A couple of news and notes before we get too far into the rabbit hole on that. William Patterson and La Crosse enter the top 25. Emory and Bethel fall out, and Emory's out. Not even a single vote. First time Patterson has been ranked since preseason 2013-14, and first time since La Crosse was ranked since 8 days ago. Yeah, a little different. Joining me on the Hoopsville Hotline to talk about it is Riley Zayas. I will play his foil tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I will play Riley's alter ego, as it were, going at it, which could be a lot of fun or could be horribly disappointing. Reminder, I don't vote in the top 25, but I do pay attention enough. Riley, it is good to see you, sir. I assume you have thoroughly thought out from the wacky weather that you have experienced down there in Texas. While some of us are still having snow on the ground, which I'm enjoying, you guys don't enjoy snow there.
No, we don't. In fact, I mean, we were out, had college baseball games going on out in the sun just this past weekend, 70-degree weather. So we're living right down here in Texas as we wrap up basketball season, and certainly don't envy you all out there in the East Coast and the snow you're still dealing with.
Hey,
so,
you may not envy it, but some of us enjoy it, so I'm not complaining. I like this
there
stuff.
You go. There you go.
Hey, Riley, your thoughts on the top 25 this week? Again, on the women's side, I just mentioned Bethel is out. Emory is out, not even getting votes at this point. Top 10 is really the top 10, just maybe some shuffling of positions. Otherwise, I wouldn't say the top 25 has solidified itself, but it's definitely calmed down.
It definitely has. And I think, one of the things that we've talked about every week, it seems like the women's poll has been a little bit more stable than the men's poll this season. I just think, there's a lot of factors involved in that, but generally, we're seeing a lot of consistency in the top 10, but honestly, as I go through my ballot, even this past week, I'm seeing some teams starting to rise a little bit that maybe floated down on my ballot just a little bit, doing different things as they went through the middle portion of their schedules. And now towards the end, they're starting to put together some solid results, starting to peak around tournament time. And a team like Carroll out of Wisconsin, the CCIW, has risen all the way up into my top 10 by this point. So you're seeing a couple of those cases going on as well. And it's definitely some movement around that middle portion of the ballot. Tends to be the most interesting part, I think, because you have a lot of teams that maybe aren't quite at that top 10 level right now, but are clearly top 20. And there's a whole bunch of those right now on the women's side in Division III.
Yeah, I would agree. Hard to pick out a dubious choice, but because of that, some have also had some recent checks that have kind of brought them back down a little bit, which is probably why the top 10 just kind of shuffles around. It's stayed status quo. All right, with that in mind, we'll start with dubious. And Riley, I'll let you start with the stirring of the pot, sir, because I have a feeling by the time we're done with here, Ryan Scott's listening in on the call. He's even going to think we're absolutely lost our ever-loving minds. But we got to go for dubious. We got to pick some wild ones at this point. Who is your dubious choice for Week 11?
Yeah, again, I mean, like I said, and you said it right there. This is a hard one. It's a hard pick every week, but I'm going to go John Carroll, who's number 10 in the most recent poll. I think John Carroll is an interesting team to me. I've watched him a bunch this season. I had him really high in my preseason ballot. I have him 11th in my own ballot, so not all that different than the poll, but I certainly found myself even this week contemplating maybe pushing them down a spot or two below that for a couple of reasons. I think they have a really high offensive upside. They have a lot of experience. But the concerning part with John Carroll right now is that in the NCAC, you have kind of a big three this year. It's Ohio Wesleyan, Denison, and John Carroll. And against those other two, John Carroll is 1-3 this season. Their only win came at Ohio Wesleyan, and that was a game that notably Macy Miller, who I think is incredible, probably, in my opinion, the number 2 post player in the country behind Mary Schleissner, was out for 3/4 of that game. And it ended up being an overtime game that John Carroll won. And the other aspect that ties in with that is, as good of a rebounder as Macy Miller is, Ohio Wesleyan still out rebounding John Carroll in that game. And John Carroll's major deficiency watching them has been their rebounding. And it's concerning when you look at what they might be able to do in the tournament, the types of teams they may be matched up with. I mean, they've been out rebounded in a lot of these games. They give 20 offensive rebounds to Denison in a 7-point loss on Saturday, which is their most recent performance against one of those kind of top tier opponents. They've been out rebounded in a lot of these games, and their offense hasn't really shown up against some of those top teams. They only scored, they've scored 50 or below in a couple of these, but you might expect them to hit a few more threes with the backcourt that they have. So I think, honestly, it's one of those things where they have the 20 wins, they have the record. I can certainly make a case for them to be the other way, but at the same time, as a voter, when I look at this, you're grading them in some ways based on how well they play in their biggest games. And to have not necessarily put together those results makes it hard to keep them in my top 10, certainly, and even consider them, right up there with Dennison. I have a gap between Dennison and John Carroll by, 5 or 6 spots right now, just because I think that John Carroll has a lot of pieces, but we haven't necessarily seen them all come together. And again, the rebounding part of this, we talked about on this show before, rebounding plays a big role in winning these tournament games. And if you can't rebound consistently, which they haven't necessarily been able to do, it can be a concerning element to your resume as you kind of look at the underlying stats there.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to win over Carnegie Mellon. They've got to win over Ohio Wesleyan in overtime back on the 4th, 70-65. Certainly took note of that, though they had lost by 2 with them in early December. For me, I think it's a little of like what to make of this conference too, right? For me.
Yeah.
Dennison has stood out at 22-1. Ohio Wesleyan is a stunning 20-2. I kind of lost track of that. They're both 11-1 in conference. And then there's Carroll, who's 2 games back in conference at 20-3. And you wonder, well, how in the world is that possible? Well, they lost to Dennison twice. One of those games wasn't even close. And they lost to Ohio Wesleyan. So John Carroll feels like, okay, you're good, but 10th? Like,
yeah,
you're right behind Ohio Wesleyan, who I get it. You beat them in an overtime game. But 10th just feels a little on the high side, to your point. Not that we're going to get a lot of evidence coming up. They play Oberlin and Wittenberg to finish the season. Wittenberg is 11-12, 4-8. Oberlin is 6-17, 3-9. I am quite sure Stephanie Dumyer is not enjoying this season as much as she was hoping, but John Carroll's probably going to have to prove some stuff. I mean, talk about a conference tournament. That's going to be wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough to even make the championship game there, right?
That's what I'm saying.
3-bid league. Yeah, for
if
sure.
If they don't get into the conference championship game, are they a top 10 team? And is this being fair too? Like, that's where I'm stuck. But yeah, maybe it's just, I mean, Dennison 7, Ohio Wesleyan 9, John Carroll 10. Feels a little odd to me. I like it. But at this point, we're also scratching this, deep to find an answer. And I am about to piss off a lot of people. Because I'm going with Wisconsin Oshkosh. Oh, yeah, I am. Brad Fisher, if you're listening to this show, he's ready to text me up a storm, or someone's going to call him, and they're going to tell him that I picked his team, the Titans, to be dubious at number 5 at 21-2, and yes, I have done so. Why? Because I can. All right, so here's the deal. I like Oshkosh, but I'm getting a little worried. Brad was being rather braggadocious on social media. They've won the regular season conference title. Note, there are 2 games left. They got a 2-game lead on Whitewater and Lacrosse. They play Lacrosse next. I know tiebreakers could be coming into play. I get it. But you're 2-2 in your last 4. You've lost to Platteville in a 47-43 game. And you lost to Eau Claire by 11. And I get this conference is loaded this year. There is one team below 500 with an overall record with UW Stout. Everybody else is 13 or better wins. This is an incredible conference this year. And I'd love to knock you and say you shouldn't be number 5 strictly because you're 2-2. I get where everybody's floated it, and I check Scott Peterson's system. He's got him number 1. Like, I get that I am way out of place here. But my concern is, Riley, they're 2-2 in their last 4 after they have been dominating teams all season long. You go back to the previous Platteville game, they beat them by 12. You go back to the previous Eau Claire game, they beat them by 12. You play Platteville at home and lose by 4 and only put up 43 points. And you play Eau Claire on the road and lose by 11? Honestly, I'm a little worried. Is Oshkosh really number 5? And I get NPI, they're 1. I get all that. But I'm a little worried Oshkosh could be running out of steam.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's certainly a fair point there, right? I'm sure they'll
they'll use it for fodder.
Certainly, and you use it as motivation, right? I think the thing about this is that's interesting about this league, and it's hard to figure out because you're at a point right now where you have a team like UW River Falls or even UW Eau Claire who are 5th and 6th in the standings and right now still have a fighting chance of an at-large bid. Like, that tells you how good this league is. And I know that there's always a conversation about, how good is the WAC really? But I think when you start to look at the metrics and what's showing up as far as like chances of getting teams in the tournament, there's no one that's on the WAC's level at that point. Now, you bring up a good point about the rematches, right? These are coming in the second time through. These two losses. It is a little bit stunning, honestly, because Oshkosh really hadn't lost at home. And I'd have to pull back up the stat, but it had been a long time since Oshkosh scored below 50 points in a game, that they allowed fewer than 50 in, right? In that Platteville game. And so they had the defensive component there, couldn't really get shots to fall. It was a very similar story against Eau Claire. They're not a team that needs to score a whole lot just based on their style and tempo. But at the same time, they just didn't seem to have everything clicking in those two games. And so I certainly think that there's maybe a sense of a case to be made of maybe some concerns there. The one thing that Oshkosh they have the resume, right, with all the really, really solid wins they built to this point. So to your point, it's going to be interesting. I mean, they still got 2 games left. They got 2 really good games. Like, no game in this conference is going to be easy. I think every single game, as we've seen, I mean, the last 2 Wednesday nights, right, they're going to have to show up for. So depending on how they finish this regular season will tell us a lot, I think. And if they bounce back, they certainly look good against Stout on Saturday. And I don't think Stout is maybe given as much credit as they should be. Their record isn't great, but again, they played a tough schedule and they have a lot of really young players. So it's going to be interesting to watch Oshkosh. I have them 4th in my ballot, but I certainly could get where a voter might put them a little bit lower.
They got lacrosse coming up 15-8, 8-4 in conference play, beat them by 8 last time they played them. Is that right? I said that. Yeah. 7. Just want to be factual. Stevens Point's coming up after that, 14-9 overall, 3-9, which means, they were 11-0 out of conference, and that certainly turned a lot of heads, but they've struggled in conference. We'll see how they finish. And listen, we got to go deep sometimes for these picks. I know it feels like a little wacky, but when you're 2-2 in your last 4 and I get it's a tough conference, I get a little worried. I get a little worried that this is a team that has fallen short in the NCAA tournament a few times, including, Final Four was short for them. They did not like how they performed at the Final Four. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, we're done with the dubious. I'm done making a fool of myself for now. I'll make a fool of myself plenty before we're done with this. Deep dive time. And, of course, I'm the one who gets the lead on the deep dive. I'm going to a team that I talked to, in fact, just today. On Hoopsville, just because I find them interesting. Johnson & Wales women's basketball. Dino Porsik's team's on the verge of doing something the program's never done, and that's win 20 wins or more in back-to-back seasons. In fact, they've only won 20 games other than last year on one other occasion. They are dominating teams in their first year in the Conference of New England, 89-44 over Curry and 79-32 over Wentworth, 69-59 over Endicott. They avenged their one loss in conference play to Hartford by 5 by beating Hartford by 14 on the road at Hartford. Their only other losses are Smith by 16. I mean, almost everybody's lost to Smith. They lost to Rhode Island, who was a former conference mate, 75-62. And we mentioned the Hartford loss, but here's what jumps out with me is they've got a few this is a young team. They have one senior on this team, folks. One. And it's because the last 2 classes have been so senior dominated. They've had to go out. He had to go out and recruit immediately. Grace Jaffrey. Folks, look this gal up. She is a 5'9" forward from Blue Hill, Maine, which is near Bar Harbor and Ellsworth for all of you maniacs. She left school a year early, which I'm sure was a story in Maine that I missed because you don't leave basketball school a year early in Maine. She's already scored 1,000 points. She's averaging 25.1 points a game. That is second most in Division III. And when she was hurt for 5 games, Breanne Foley stepped in to the tune of 16 points a game now on average, and she's got other options. Riley, if it's not this year, this J&W team could be really good down the road. And I get maybe you can't vote for him right now because the resume doesn't jump out, but wow, there's a lot of things about J&W that intrigue me.
They're definitely one of those teams that I've kind of wanted to put on my ballot all year. I just haven't really been able to get in there. I've really liked them from the beginning of the year. I talked to coach at the beginning of the season about kind of the success they were having. I mean, they were back in 21-22, obviously before he was there, but this is a program that went 2-22, right? They won 2 games the entire season. Now we're talking about them as a team that probably should be in this top 5 conversation a little bit more. A team that even last year was really close to an NCAA tournament bid. And you mentioned it. I mean, even when Grace Jaffray was out, they stepped up. I mean, they beat Hartford and they beat Endicott, and I believe they beat both of them on the road in huge conference games. And to me, that tells you a lot, right? When you have a player who is one of the best players, I mean, certainly in the region, maybe even Division III as far as scores go, and you're able to win games without her against really good conference opponents. I think this league is underrated. I've said that from the beginning of the year. It's a really, really deep league that will probably end up as a 1-bid league with a bunch of teams fighting for that 8Q. So, yeah, I think absolutely. Johnson Wales is a team to watch. They're underrated for a lot of reasons. They may not have the strength of schedule, but when you watch them play, they are very cohesive. And you mentioned it, they're really young. And I think it definitely creates some optimism for the future. They're going to be a team we're going to be talking about a lot more as time goes on. This is a team that has 5 seniors in the starting lineup, and maybe they're peaking for 1 year. No, this is a program that is going to be in the mix for quite a while.
Yeah, they lost by 16 to St. Joe's, Connecticut in the conference, GNAC conference tournament last year, which was unfortunate. They would have been an NCAA tournament team. And now they're in the CNE. Like that's the amazing part is they jump into the CNE now. And anyway, my point being, this is an interesting team. By the way, Jaffray last year led the team at 25.4 points a game as a freshman that you pointed out rightly because it wasn't clicking in my head at the time off air. As a 17-year-old, a high school senior was in the GNAC against some decent teams, and she's putting up 25.5. Holy, and this was the only school she looked at, or at least it was the first.
Yeah, and I would just add really quickly too, one of the things talking with coach in the preseason, he had told me, I asked him, I was like, with the way the transfer portal is nowadays and with the way players like this emerge, right? How do you keep a player like that here? And he said, honestly, she just really, really loves it here. She loves the program, loves the environment and her teammates, and said, no, I'm not looking anywhere else. There were some people in her ear this past offseason.
Of course.
Saying maybe you could go, right? Because she's absolutely a Division I player. And so I think it just speaks to the program they have there too, the culture of that program to keep players like that, because they have a lot of talent and a lot of talent that could be playing other places, and they're all playing at Johnson & Wales. And I think it's a really good sign for a program like that.
Yeah, no, hats off to him. And he graduated a bunch of seniors last year who finally who had been part of that 2-12 or 22 campaign and finally helped get them to where they were. They graduated a bunch of seniors prior to that. They've got 1 senior. They've got 1 junior. They have 1 senior. They have 1 junior. They may go get some transfer, whatever. This is a sophomore and freshman group. Watch out for the next few years. All right, sir. Enough about the good cooking school of Bobby Flay's alma mater, and pick out one for me, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to go Colorado College for my deep dive. Go out to the other side of the country in Region 10. I think Colorado College is really interesting. Yeah, they're a team to me that they don't have any votes right now, but they're one to keep an eye on out of the SCAC. I know that Catherine has put together a really strong group. And honestly, there were some question marks coming into this year about who would really step up in the SCAC. Colorado College was losing some really talented players, and they've just really reloaded. And I get that they had the road loss to McMurray about a week ago, but they just beat TLU this past weekend. Texas Lutheran, who is kind of the main challenger of them in this league right now, went 2-0 against them on the year. Along with that, the Wartburg win, I think, continues to look better and better. At the time, we still weren't really sure what to make of Wartburg when they won that game, but Wartburg has continually now put together results in the second half of this season that make you think, okay, like Wartburg could win that AQ, all right, out of the American Rivers Conference and be an NCAA tournament team. They also played Hardin-Simmons, a very athletic team projected to win the ASC. They played them within 2. So I think Colorado College has played the non-conference games to make you kind of think twice when you're looking through your ballot towards the last few spots. Like, give them a second look, because they put together these results that along with their conference results, right? I mean, the SCAC isn't a bad league by any means, especially the division they play in. McMurray's good. They beat them once, and then obviously beat TLU twice. So I think Colorado College is one to keep an eye on with what they've done. They got 4 top 50 wins to go along with that. So 1 out of Region 10. There haven't been a whole lot of Region 10 teams in the mix this year for top 25. I think Colorado College is certainly one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they're a really good team. Catherine August has a squad that, I mean, listen, until that McMurray game, they were rolling. They hadn't lost since mid-December against Hardin-Simmons. They had lost previously to Pacific as part of their absolutely wild November schedule, which started with a loss to Hope, beat Calvin, Aurora, Puget Sound, then lost Pacific and St. Benedict, and then beat Whitman. Like, just an insane schedule that saw them in Michigan and Oregon. Yeah, okay, they lost to Hardin-Simmons, but then they started rolling. My only concern was the way they lost to McMurray. They had beaten McMurray back on the 23rd of January, 85-63 at home. And yes, they go on the road to play McMurray. They lost 54-37. They got held to nearly 50 points less in a game which they held McMurray to 10 points less. Like, that was startlingly bad. There we go. Now they've won since, and they got Centenary and LeTourneau ahead. And they're on top of the standings on their overall. They got the best conference record at 13-1. McMurray is behind them at 11-2. I think that game has probably given a lot of people some pause, right, Riley? Like 37 points?
Absolutely. It's certainly given me pause, right? I mean, they've been on my watch list, but it's hard to move them up when you take a loss like that on the road. It seems like every year they've had kind of one of those where they just drop one on the road. Obviously, the travel in their case is a little bit different compared to the other teams in their league. So there's that to battle. But obviously, they have to come to them too, right? And Colorado College is always good at home. So, but yeah, I think they're going to be one to keep an eye on. But I agree that McMurray loss definitely hurts your resume when you don't have a whole lot of margin for error if you're looking to build the top 25 worthy resume at this point in the season.
Yeah. All right, so there's your deep dive, folks. We're having some fun with this with Riley Zayas on the women's side. Let's switch gears. We'll talk Debatable now, basically a team that up for debate. Like, where do we think they could be? Remember, I'm not voting this top 25. Riley is. But we'll let Riley start with a Debatable team that catch-all, as we said on the men's side. Catch-all. What do you got?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to go Carnegie Mellon out of the UAA. They're one of those teams that I think for a little while, everyone kind of wrote them off. And then all of a sudden they go to NYU and they almost upset the Violets and break that win streak.
Well,
and
twice.
I think
There and at home.
Twice. Right. And for me, it was that first one, right? After that first game, watching them play, and I watched them previously. I mean, I watched them beat WashU, and certainly a result you take note of because WashU is playing really well this year. But that was a road game to me in a place where NYU really had not struggled at home at all. And Carnegie Mellon went in there and really pushed them. Right. And so I think it turned my head. Certainly I put him in my ballot that day for that next ballot. And then, I've since moved them up. They're 23rd in my ballot right now. Now, the conversation with Debatable here is, have they done enough to warrant this sort of a resume? How much of the season do you take into account when you're putting together your ballot? How much of it are you trying to weigh the full season results, and how much of it are you taking the last 2-3 weeks? I think they've been a different team the last 6-7 game stretch. They went out and split their road trip in the Midwest this past weekend, beat WashU but then lost to Chicago. And so again, what do you kind of do with that? And I think that's where the debatable comes in. They're not currently in the top 25. So there's obviously enough voters that are feeling like maybe they still need to do a little bit more to prove that they are a consistent top 25 team and not a team having just a good stretch of a couple of weeks. I think that there's a lot to unpack with this team because they are very young and they've gotten a whole lot better since November. But there's also this part of it where you kind of go back and you look and they've taken some losses you wouldn't necessarily expect or been pushed in some games you wouldn't think they should be pushed in, some closer games against some of the more bottom teams in the UAA. So it's kind of been a mixed bag for them and the Tartans this season. But I think there's a lot there, too, that you can make the case for them to be a top 25 team when you match them up against everyone else towards the bottom of that poll.
Yeah, Carnegie Mellon's a team that I think is playing well. I had said, you know it well, I had said that stretch where Carnegie and Case were back-to-back weekends were going to be NYU's biggest trap. I almost wonder if the letdown of almost pulling it off kind of got to them a little bit. Like they nearly did it, right? They lost by 1 on the road to NYU. They lost by 7 or is it 9 at home to get NYU to some late shooting. Now you almost did it, and then you beat WashU, and now it's Chicago. Like it just starts to wear on you, and you drop one to Chicago. Now twice. It also could just be flat out a matchup issue, right? Like it could be completely unrelated. But I think they're solid. I think they're worth keeping an eye on. I think they're gonna make this conference and help make this conference so much better. I'm a little disappointed that they couldn't use that momentum. Now they're 5 games back, or 6 games. No, 5.5 games. Oh, that's right, because we have a game they have to make up. I keep forgetting. Against NYU, and they're 3 games back of WashU and Chicago. Like, chances of an AQ are gone, and now can they make the tournament? They're going to maybe have to start. Kathy's going to have to get this team to start building to next year. But they've got a chance to still make some waves at the end here. Rochester and Emory, and then a rematch with Emory. So they'll play at home on Emory on this coming Sunday. Then the Wednesday play at Emory before coming home on Saturday. If I think I have this right, or is it? Yes. They go
to Case. Yeah.
Then they go to Case. I'm trying to see, looking at the dates. Yeah, that's right. So they'll play Emory on Sunday at home to wrap up their home schedule. Then they'll go on Wednesday to Emory, and then on Saturday, they'll be at Case Western. So that a little funky in the UAA. They had to make up games that's late January storm kind of fouled up. I like them, Riley. I do. Just too bad it looks like the gas tank may be a little bit on empty on them. I'm going with Wisconsin Lutheran, and it's a tough one for me because I get why voters are going against them, but I also feel like they're getting missed out on. I got an email from someone unrelated who wanted to ask about WNL several weeks ago. The conversation was, listen, beat Trine, #1 in their conference. Beat IWU, #1 in their conference. Beat Wartburg, #1 in their conference. Beat Gustavus, who's in, battling in their conference. Lost to Platteville, who's in the middle of the WIAC. Lost to Messiah, who's on top of their conference. Lost to Norbert in their own conference. Who had also beat Ripon, who's in the top 25. Like, of course, it doesn't tell the whole story, right? Like, we're missing some of the details in that story. Case in point, not talking about some of their other tough losses, like Loris, 63-60. I think they're a good team. I think they've taken too many losses. The game against Milwaukee counts, and we're tongue-in-cheek with Clay Knipple about it, going, hey, I'm glad you're counting it, but why are you counting it? It's likely going to be a loss. They lost by 24. It does count against their resume, per se. The loss to Messiah it's not as strong a resume as it was in the past. That conference isn't as strong as it used to be. Messiah is not as strong as it used to be. Yeah, they got to win over Illinois Wesleyan. That's terrific. But after that, they have not played anybody that's going to draw any eyeballs. And they lost one to St. Norbert. Let's see. They are 2 games essentially clear, 1.5 games clear of St. Norbert in the conference standings. They've got 2 left against Edgewood and Benedictine. Benedictine is having a good season, but not world beaters, and Edgewood's 500. I like WNL, but I'm curious. By the way, I have the deep dive graphic up. Sorry, folks, I'll fix that now because this is not a deep dive. It's definitely a debatable. Where do you have W&L and WNL? Sorry, confusing it with Washington Lee. Where do you have Wisconsin Lutheran? Where do you think they should be sitting? Because I feel like maybe they should have been getting top 25 attention sooner, but where they are seems appropriate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Wisconsin Lutheran is an interesting one. I've watched them on and off throughout this season. I think at the beginning of the year, they were in my ballot a little bit. They were kind of in and out for a couple of weeks. As you mentioned, they played a tough schedule. Now, I'm one of those voters. I'm not really going a whole lot on record. So, like, even the Milwaukee loss, it is what it is. Without it, I think, they're 18-4. So, but at the same time, too, I'm more looking at kind of the body of work, especially as of late in a way, like, you have all those results. And as you said, like the Illinois Wesleyan win looked really good on neutral court, kind of hard. I mean, it's hard to judge some of those neutral court games coming off of Christmas and all that, but it was still a 10-point win, right? You give them credit for that. It's games though, like the most recent one, like early February, they played Aurora on the road. It went into overtime, and
Yeah,
Aurora's good, but I wouldn't say Aurora's top 50. And they had a hard time getting over that one. The St. Norbert loss wasn't great. I think there's been some of those games that just give you a little bit of pause. Similar to how we were talking about with Colorado College, right? Where you have one loss and it just kind of makes it a little bit tougher to make the case to vote for them. As compared to early on, right, when they were going through non-conference, playing some tight games against the Plattevilles and the, Messiah, obviously, and close losses are what they are, right? You give them credit for those and playing good games, but when you get into conference, especially a league like the NACC, it's hard. You got to take care of those games maybe a little bit more than what they have. And that said, like they have two freshmen who are playing really well, a couple sophomores. They're a young team. I think they're going to continue to be in the mix, probably going to win that league, right, when it's all said and done. I would have them closer to like 30 if I was like ranking all the way out to that point, 30 to 35 maybe. It's just hard to get a read on them. Yeah, at this point, when they're still kind of playing some tight games against teams that you feel like that maybe they should beat by a little bit more. If they are on the level of an Illinois Wesleyan or a Platteville, right? I mean, Messiah has struggled at times this year too. Wartburg has struggled at times, certainly. So it's hard when you don't have a great read on some of those other teams. Even Trine, right? That early season game against Trine's gotten a lot better. There's even times where I'm not sure about Trine, right? So,
well, it's also the first game of the season, right? Like
right.
At this point, we're not putting a ton of stock in it.
No, not at all, right? And that's what's hard about some of these teams. Like Ripon is the same way, and I'll just really quickly say, like Ripon is in my ballot, but there's this part of you every week that's a little bit unsure. Now, Ripon has taken care of business a little bit better, but with some of these teams out of single bid leagues, you're basing more of their resume on what happened in November and December when they were playing those other teams, right, early in their own seasons. You're not really seeing them how they are right now. So that's kind of where I'm at with Wisconsin Lutheran.
Scott Peterson has Wisconsin Lutheran 27th. He's got 4 wins in the top 50, but 3 losses out of the top 30. My answer came back to this individual simply like, if this team is good enough, or where did I lose it? I had it and I lost it. Where did I put it? Sorry, I had this great little quote because every once in a while I come up with great little thoughts. There it is. If I was a voter, I'd be asking, if they can beat Trine, Illinois Wesleyan, etc., then why are they losing to Loras, Messiah, and others of that ilk? Like, I think that's the problem with Wisconsin Lutheran is for all their good wins, they've got losses that make you go, what? Like, if you're beating Illinois Wesleyan, you shouldn't be losing that game. If you're losing that game, what are you doing beating that team? And so it just raises more questions than it answers. And I think Wisconsin Lutheran's been stuck in that to some degree. Listen, I think they've been very good at getting a lot of wins, but they haven't been doing a lot of things to move the needle. Riley.
Yep.
Loved it. You are awesome, sir, as always. Make me sound smarter if I sound smart at all. As always, I want your take on what's ahead.
Yeah, I mean, final week of the regular season for almost everyone besides the NESCAC and the UEC.
And I think ODAC starts this weekend, doesn't it?
Does ODAC start as well? Possibly. I mean, yeah. So I think we have some really good games, right? Coming up, some really interesting matchups to end the regular season and/or conference tournaments, right? Already getting going. I think ODAC still has a couple more.
Yeah, I misspoke. I forgot they shrunk their tournament, so they didn't expand into the weekend.
That's right. Yeah, but anyway, right? But a league like that, ODAC is a good example. There's a lot of things on the line right now for some of these teams to make the tournament. You got a bunch of leagues out there like that where this week is going to be huge in setting up. What's going to happen. Denison plays Ohio Wesleyan in a battle for first place in the NCAC. That will determine who hosts that conference tournament, right? So home court advantage is going to be big in that league. So we got a lot of good games coming up. It's going to be a packed next 5-6 days to set all these conference tournaments, and those are going to play a big role. I mean, we got a lot of one bid leagues out there.
Riley, you got a great question that I just saw pop up on the old Twitters. Ryan Scott answered it. That's how I saw it. Scott Peterson, our buddy and pal, asked, with only one D3 women's basketball game tonight, I'm not planning on updating the D3 stat lab tomorrow. Okay. Real question is, should I go to Waffle House for breakfast? I've never been. Ryan replies, I went to Waffle House for the first time with the D3 Hoops crew at the GLI this year. It was not nearly as dirty as it seemed from the outside. I have my thoughts, but sir, you are from Waffle House country. Like, you all use this as a metric, not all. The government uses this as a metric on how bad a storm may be. Shall our friend Scott Peterson visit the Waffle House for breakfast?
Well, I'll tell you what, I guess, I'm a rare exception. Waffle House is pretty big around here. We don't have many like in this immediate area. So I can't say I speak from experience. I'm in the same boat as Ryan. I haven't been.
Have you never been?
Never been. So Scott will have to let us know how it goes.
Well, I have, and I will say I've never been disappointed. I've even been to one in Salem, Virginia, and I was not disappointed.
May have to try it down here in Texas then. We'll see.
I go in, I have some hash browns. They're always good. Listen, I don't get the waffles. I'm not always a waffle guy, but I have. They're good. I actually, in fact, ordered their mix during COVID for the family. We screwed it up the first time. Folks, the secret to the mix is let it sit overnight. It's pretty good. It's a sweet waffle, though. It is a sweet waffle. It has a sweet flavor to it. So you got to be ready for that. Hey, Riley, good as always, sir. I don't remember. Do you have availability next week? Will we be seeing you, or might we be saying adieu?
We'll see. We may have to say adieu for now. I'll certainly be around when we get to the following week.
There's also things ahead. Certainly we'll be tackling, but I couldn't remember if we get you next week. So if we don't have another Top 25 show that features you, thank you so much for your time and your efforts and your expertise and your thoughts. It's always fun to chat with you. If we have you again, I shall repeat these words. In the meantime, you take care and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Riley Zayas joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline, talking all things women's Top 25, and let me be his foil there. And I can't wait for my text messages to start. Yeah, I said it. Maybe Oshkosh is dubious. Bring it, Brad. Let's go. I'm up for it. Let's make it spicy at the end of this season. If you are a Hoopsville member and you've been watching this live and or you have watched it on the archive before, available for the public, thank you so much for being a supporter. If you're watching this archive and you haven't become a Hoopsville member, please do so by going to buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. There's a donation section. We've had a handful of donations recently. Thank you so much for buying me a cup of coffee. But if you're buying me a cup of coffee, you're simply giving a donation. If you want to give a membership, sign up for Role Player or better, scroll a little bit further down. You'll find those options. I want to thank Ed, for example, for jumping on board in the top 20 or into a Role Player role to get access to this show live or on demand before the public. Thank you so much. Your support helps us do this show and expand our coverage. We have expansion plans in the works. We had a question from our friend Grayson. He asks, top 25 double take. He says, how does the first place votes work? It's very simple, Grayson. As a top 25 voter, I am given all kinds of information. I go chase down my information, and then I put my ballot together. I'll give you a brief look without you really seeing much. There's my top 25. Every position has X amount of points worth it. And so number 1 is worth 25 points. Number 25 is worth 1 point, right? So 25 onward down. So second is 24, third is 23, etc. First place votes is everybody who's voted first. So when you see a parenthesis with a number, that's how many voters of the 25 have voted them number 1. So in the women's case, there are 20 voters who are voting NYU number 1, and there are 5 who are voting Scranton number 1. And then everybody else fills it out. So your points are broken down from there. So the max points that you can achieve in the top 25 on the D3 Hoops side is 25 times 25. So 625 votes. If you look at the top 25 as a result on the women's side, NYU has 619. Well, considering that they're getting 20 first place votes, that means they've got 500 alone right then and there, and 119 more votes are being decided by 5 more voters on the average of putting them second or third. Most of them are putting them second. Maybe 1 or 2 are putting them third. Or maybe 4 of them are putting them in the second spot, which equals 96 votes. So you subtract that, you get 23, which means the one voter is putting them third. So there you go. So it's most likely 20 voters have NYU 1, 4 voters have them second, 1 voter has them third. For Scranton, they've got 605 votes. They've got 20, let's see, 20, I can't do math that fast. Sorry, did the wrong math. 125 of their votes are coming for first place voters. The rest is divvied out. So 605 minus 125 equals 480 divided by 20. Everybody else has them second on average. Pretty much. So your NYU and your Scranton voters are pretty much in lockstep, except for 1 voter who has NYU third is pretty much how it breaks down. So that's how it works. But we can't vote for anybody more than 25. That's it. That's our limit. And we have to vote for 1 in each spot, even though there's a lot of times we don't want to. I hope that answers your question. We don't really dive into that, but I hope it answers your question. And with that, we'll wrap up this show. Got to get going. A reminder, if you're watching this live or early on the on-demand, Thursday, noon Eastern time, we'll have our normal show. 7 p.m., we'll have our Top 16s exclusive show with the committee chairs. Next Monday, back on the air at noon Eastern, followed by maybe our final Top 25 show at 8:30 that evening. And we'll talk more about the rest of the schedule as we go along. Just 2 weeks left in the regular season, folks, including conference tournaments. There is plenty in the works to be done and plenty to talk about. So stick with us here at d3hoops.com and Hoopsville. Email us questions, or for the committee chairs on Thursday, Hoopsville at d3sports.com. You can email them as well about NCAA tournament selections. And thank you for taking the time to join us. I'm going to sign off. This show's gone long enough. Hope you enjoyed it. You've been listening to Hoopsville, presented by d3hoops.com from the WBCA studios. Appreciate your support of our work. Head to buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville to support us even further. And we'll see you again on the next one.